Wonderful. Well, thank you all for being here and investing your time today. We're going to get back to it, and we're going to hear from several speakers one at a time, and then that will compose the panel, and then we'll take questions of the panel from you in a similar manner in which you asked your questions of Jennifer. So we'll kick off with Jonathan Broadbent, Protect Ohio Children Coalition. Jonathan is the North Region Co-Chair and board member of Protect Ohio Children Coalition. He is a husband, father, Christian conservative patriot, education-aware freedom fighter, entrepreneur, and business owner. Jonathan Broadbent. Thank you. All right, Scott Douglas, Rocky River Citizens for Transparency. Scott Douglas is the chair of trustees for Rocky River Citizens for Transparency. When radical indoctrination came into the school district, this group formed as an opportunity to shed light and show more transparency on the school district and the public library. In Rocky River, the school board appoints library trustees. Omar Terrazzi. Omar is an attorney with over a decade of experience working with schools on public policy and legal matters. He is a city council member for the city of Hilliard and has been working with Hilliard school board members to research and address concerns related to, is it DEI and SEL in the school district. He will provide a unique perspective and strategies for addressing these important topics. So welcome, Omar. You're welcome. Jennifer. And Jennifer, I hope I pronounce it's Jennifer Foyt.
Everyone gets it wrong.
Jennifer Foyt, Olintanji for Educational Integrity. Jennifer was a candidate for the Olintanji Local School District Board of Education. She is a strong supporter of district transparency, financial and professional accountability, protection of parental rights. Jennifer firmly believes in putting students first and is still working to ensure students are valued as individuals and receiving their best education. Jennifer McWilliams. Jennifer needs no introduction. Jonathan, I believe you're going to lead us off.
Sure, I'd be happy to. I think I was told earlier I'm supposed to use the plugged-in microphone. I don't know that it matters. All right, there we go. So everyone that's here is here for a reason, and I assume are on board and understand at least some of the beginnings of the issues that we're facing. But for purposes of the camera, I'm going to start off by kicking off my comments with what I normally do when I'm invited to go and speak somewhere. And that is to say that I'm Jonathan Broadbent, and I'm nobody. I'm not important. I'm not special or unique. What I am is a dad, formerly from Beechwood, Ohio, a suburb of Cleveland, who had the audacity to stick my hand up in the air and question our school board. Everything that's happened since then comes from that initial raising of the hand, organizing of our community, and going into our school board and questioning them. I am thankful and in the fortunate position of having been close to John and Diane Stover, who had started Protect Ohio Children. They saw what we were able to do in Beechwood and offered me a position at Protect Ohio Children. Since then, everything that we're seeing, that was March 8th of last year, before I think we really knew much about CRT, and everything has snowballed since then. I'm going to just quickly run through what I normally discuss, and then we're going to get kind of into panel questions. This is, I have like 10 minutes, right? Or an hour?
Yeah, actually,
or,
an hour. I do want to let everyone know on the panel, a timer will be displayed when there's a minute, 30 seconds left in 10 minutes.
all right, keeping my eye up there so I don't get like kicked in the shin or something. So everything that's happened since then has been, I gotta say, it's like the hand of God. It just, so many things have lined up in ways that are kind of frightening and helpful at the same time. So one thing, before we dive into all the minutia of the stuff, and we can, and I've made it my point over the last year to become up to speed on all of these issues, where it comes from, how it's funded, what the intention is, what damage it can do and the harm that it's impacting. I tend to go into conversations with that lead off. I'm the guy from this suburb who raised my hand because I have kids and I care. I end with, I'm asking you in the room to be that next person to raise your hand, because then we're important. But before we get into the minutia of this stuff, as you're faced with the prospect of talking to other parents out there in the community, just remember one thing. It's simple. Keep it simple. Schools. See? I avoided saying that. So schools have one job. I go out and I talk to people all the time. They're failing at their one job. And nobody is denying that. Academics, educational excellence, and I tell people constantly, over and over again, if you want me to, sure, or anybody, we can dive into all the minutia of CRT and what is it, what isn't it, and SEL and all of that stuff. But if they're not doing their one job, why are we even talking about it? You have one job, schools. Get in there and provide academics. If the kids are failing, and we are graduating classes now of illiterate children who can't make change for $1 at the cash register. You talk about hireable, forget about all that stuff. It's nonsense, and we all know it. So the schools are failing in that. I then kind of take it in a couple of different directions. I had this interesting experience. In 2001, I went cage diving with great white sharks. It was pretty cool. It was a lot of fun. I learned a lot in the lead up to that from my dive master about something called task loading. Task loading is when you ask too much of somebody and you jeopardize their safety. I'm a pretty experienced diver. I am not good enough for deep dive wreck penetration. That's what's called going into the sunken ships and stuff. I don't do that. I'm not skilled enough. But if somebody loads things on, changes my oxygen tank, does all kinds of extra stuff, I'm risking my life. Schools are task loading. Schools are failing at their primary job, and now we just keep on talking about adding more stuff. So, and that's the reason for bringing that up, is to just try to simplify the conversation to entice people further into it. Because as you talk to parents, there are going to be people that argue back about every single point that you can bring up, except that one. We're failing in education. There are charts you can bring out from anywhere, do searches, use those charts, engage people, get them talking. From there, you can get into all kinds of minutia about what's working, what's not, what the intentions are, the funding. And one of the objectives we have here today is to talk about the resources that are available, because whether you know it or not, you're not going to see it on the news. We're winning some battles. We have tremendous momentum. We are doing great things, and the resources that are available to us to fight back in school districts are extraordinary. All you need to do is just find them and tap into them. One of them is Protect Ohio Children. Just so you know, with Protect Ohio Children, we're one of many resources out there. We're all collaborating. Indiana, excuse me, I'm pointing in the wrong direction. Purple for parents, great group in Indiana, all over the country, and we're collaborating, and we're sharing the success stories and what works. So tie into Protect Ohio Children and or other groups, and get engaged, get involved. The big thing that we're doing at Protect Ohio Children, new for this year, we're creating, I'm calling them working groups or committees, and we're going to focus on these areas that need to be fixed within the schools. Get involved in your local community, find the resources, tap into stuff like us. We're free. We're going to pump it out there and give you templates, you name it, and run with it. Jump on these committees. Together, we can do this thing. I can't, there's no timer up there.
That's perfect.
I guess I was talking fast. Should I slow down and say more?
My name is Scott Douglas. I'm the chair of the Rocky River Citizens for Transparency, and Ultimately, we believe that education is the pursuit of truth. And our goal as an organization is to seek the truth and make it known. Here's some truths that we found out just by asking questions at school board meetings. Like, first of all, who has the authority to select curriculum? We didn't really know. And I will discuss how that is selected. Secondly, we asked the question, can a parent review curriculum before it's actually taught? And then thirdly, can I record a school board meeting? Is that legal? So, first of all, and I'd like to close afterwards with telling a little bit about our group and how we got started. So, let's start out with question one. Who has the authority to select curriculum? Ohio Revised Code 3313.21 states, the Board of Education of each school district shall be the sole authority in determining academic curriculum. We probably all know that in this room now. Most of the parents have no idea. Question number two, can a parent review curriculum before it's presented to their child? And of course, yes. And they should. They should look at that curriculum. And that comes from the Ohio Revised Code also, 3313.60, Section G. And that guarantees the parents the right to promptly examine their child's curriculum. And what does promptly mean? Immediately, without delay. We were slow walked in Rocky River a few times, and they finally got it. What if the vendor, it's done by somebody else, what if the vendor claims that this curriculum is proprietary and you can't see it? It happens. We've run into this problem. You need to insist on your legal rights. They cannot deny you. Hold them account and speak with an attorney if you need to, and have them promptly show you the curriculum. Can I opt my child out of parts of the curriculum that I don't agree with? The answer is yes, of course. You are the child's legal guardian, and if you choose not to have something, they can give you other things that you can do. The problem is parents can't opt out what they don't know. So Protect Ohio Children has a resource for that, and that is the opt-out resource form. And you can find that on their website. Question number three, what are Ohio's sunshine laws? And in a nutshell, the sunshine laws state that public meetings must be public. Can you take a video camera into a public meeting? The answer is yes. Can you record conversations? Yes. Short answer, there's nuances to all these things, but in Ohio, we are a one-party consent law. So as long as one party knows that you're recording, it's legit, and hopefully the person recording, you know that you're recording. Some school districts, school districts are required to make meeting minutes and audio recordings. A lot of them do not do video. Ours did during COVID, and that's what woke up our community. As soon as they figured that out, they cut the cord. So we started going and recording the meetings and putting it on the website. Yes. And a couple of our videos have went viral. Check out the Rocky River Drag Queen Story Hour. The trustees of the local library are appointed by our school board. So it's all tied together. Now a little bit about our group. How did we begin? We began less than a year ago. We haven't turned a year old yet. Our board decided to draft a DIE statement, diversity, inclusion, and equity. And a few of us wrote a letter to the board, and in the process of getting the petition signed, we turned it into a group. We formed a nonprofit organization and started out as a small group of people. It's always easier to start with a small group of people to get an organization going than to start with 100 and try and figure out what your consensus is. So start out small. Now we have hundreds on our email list within the community. We've had some victories. Our first goal was to remove diversity training from our schools. We presented our school board with infutable evidence from a student's audio recording of the diversity training. The audio disproved their repeated claims, "We do not teach CRT." We had them. And then we put the recording on our website so people could listen to what was actually being taught. Evidence is what wins arguments, not just passionate speeches and emotion. It was the evidence that they had to answer to in our case. In the end, they removed the diversity training consultants from our school and from our budget. We were going to hire a full-time diversity training in our school, and they resigned because of what came out. Yes. Then we mobilized our community and helped swing our school board over during the last election back to our side. We built relationships with our administration, which would allow us to bring concerns to the district and seeing them make requested changes. We got their attention through accountability, and now they're listening. It's been a continual battle, but you're always just one election away from losing the ground that you've gained in your local school district. We continue to advocate for a district-wide policy. We want informed parental consent. We continually are dealing with offensive content, and it always catches our parents off guard. So our district has policies publicly available on what they call board docs, and we've been looking them up and have found infractions, and we demanded that they would follow their own policies. And for example, under personnel and under staff ethics policy, teachers are not allowed to use their position for partisan one-sided instruction. So we collected stories from the parents on biased instruction that their kids had revealed. We presented these stories to the assistant superintendent, and we asked the teachers to receive training and their legal responsibilities to deliver balanced instruction. Our district developed a staff training around these policies. There has also been a policy that you cannot survey students on politics, religion, race, sex, personal issues without parental consent. Knowing the policies and demand that your school board and administration follows them. School boards take notice when they have to consult their attorney and to see if they are actually breaking laws. Know your rights. Coupled with using free speech, a powerful combination, having a website, we have a website, to share what we've learned amplifies your message, and keep it factual and professional. And you shouldn't be as liable to be sued at that point in time. If you can't sleep at night, maybe you should get an umbrella insurance policy. Your superpower, though, is the Freedom of Information Act document request. Emails, communications between your district and their consultants are public record. Follow the money, sleuth out their secrets. We have found some very interesting facts along the way. We found out through an email correspondence that our diversity center had refused to show the curriculum that they purchased to the board. We also requested the diversity training slides from the teachers, or that was presented to our teachers, and found that it was an indirect way to indoctrinate students into gender acceptance and all other forms of social emotional learning. But this is a spiritual battle, and I attribute the success of our organization and what things that we've accomplished on the prayers of our team. This cannot be understated. Every major move that our group has done has been undergirded by the foundation of prayer. During our busiest battle season, we've had weekly prayer meetings, and we fight this battle because we believe that we are the watchmen to protect our children. We seek to do everything we can in a respectful way that cannot be maligned. We are maligned, but we've been called names, but we carry on and develop a thicker skin. The armor still holds. Social emotional learning wants to interject themselves between parents and the child in the name of the whole child. The whole child is not the responsibility of the school system. The whole child is the responsibility of parents. Parents will be parents the whole life of the child. The school was not there when your child was born. They were not there to see your child's first footsteps. I'm pretty sure they're not going to pay for their weddings. So the moral, social, emotional, and physical health of the child is the parent's responsibility. Schools, stay in your lane, focus on academics. Parents are raising up all over the nation to take back their children from becoming wards of the state. Thank you.
Excuse me, can I mention that I got a text from people watching, they can't hear yet. They might have-
Is this mic not working? This mic?
And hold it close, yes.
This mic? So let's make sure, is this working? For you, yes. Is the people online hearing this? Is this working? Somebody in the back? And I know we can hear it, but I'm saying yes, got the thumbs up. Okay. All right, so we can go. First of all, thank you everyone for coming together. This shows how much as, Americans, we need to get back together, working with each other, and take back our schools. And it starts in churches and communities, religious. It's that partnership, all of us working together. No one person can get this done. It's a matter of who owns this country. Ultimately, is it owned by the people, or is it owned by big corporations that are coming up with all kinds of things to push down and with consultants and so forth. So you might say, well, what's a Hilliard City Council member doing talking about SEL in the first place? First of all, yes, I have been involved as an attorney for schools, particularly charter schools. My wife's a principal, my dad's a principal. I've been involved with this for years, but it really started off when about a year ago, and by the way, how many of you are local here that are Hilliard or local in the area? Yeah, okay, good, almost everybody. So Hilliard City Council, we had a new Democrat get on that said, hey, we want to pass a local Hilliard City anti-discrimination law, essentially. And specifically it was all about LGBT. She wanted specifically an LGBT law specific to the city of Hilliard. And my position on the topic was, well, this is a national state, like at the city level, it doesn't function. Nobody's ever going to come to City Hall, say they were discriminated. It just doesn't work at the city level. This was a political debate. You can have this. That's fine. We ended up getting the schools, an email went out in the schools saying, hey, let's get all of the students to write letters in support of this legislation. That's the one family values group. They went out and sent out an email saying, hey, this is a red flag. The schools have gone too far. I actually am the one that emailed the school before it even got out. And I said, look, I emailed the person who actually emailed that. I said, look, this is not the role of the school. And if you want to get the kids to understand the political debate and how bills are passed, ordinances are passed, and how the local government functions, all more for it. We'll be there. We will have you come in, bring the students so they can hear the debates, see what's going on, understand. Or we'll come to you. We'll get, if it's about the education of understanding how local government works, 100% with you. Instead, what happens is that particular principal, of course, it wasn't really her. It came from higher ups, and there was a lot more involved to it. But she got disciplined. That sent the email. It's always the low man on the totem, or low person on the totem pole, sorry, that gets disciplined. And then what did they do? They went back to the kids and they said, okay, we're just going to put a pause on this. And we're not going to do this publicly, but we're going to do the exact same thing just behind the scenes once everybody's calmed down and not paying attention. And that's exactly what they did do. And about a month or so, 2 months later, when we were debating the thing again, we had a student rep come up and present us with 50 or 60 anonymous letters complaining about discrimination that they're facing because of their gender identity or whatever in the schools. And this legislation has absolutely nothing to do with the schools. So even it pass or not pass, it has no effect on whatever, let's assume that they're facing hardship or whatever, they're being asked to do basically a virtue signaling exercise. They still have no clue what the heck is going on as it relates to the legislation, what it means or anything like that. And at the end of the day, what was the education that happened? It was purely virtue signaling. This is how you look like you're part of doing something and waving a flag, and you're not really accomplishing anything. And to this day, this legislation, I voted against it. It still hasn't done anything. It was just basically, from my perspective, a virtue signaling exercise. Anyway, so just goes to show that when the schools are doing political activism, that's what they're trying to get kids in a specific direction instead of education. It's activism kind of stuff. So I said, okay, this is kind of getting irritating. Let me dig into this further. And by the way, what was mentioned by the previous speakers, this is sort of the formula. Sunshine kills the vampires. Okay, remember this. Sunshine kills the vampires. How do you get sunshine on some of this stuff? You do a public records request. And I said, okay, well, what the heck's going on over there? Let me see this. I keep hearing about Panorama and all this other stuff. And I got every single Panorama test that they've given for the last 5 years. And I started saying Panorama to the teachers and to the students. And I started graphing this stuff and saying, okay, what is the rate of change? What are they really even asking? And what is it even doing? Is it accomplishing anything? And is it related to anything that is going on in actual discipline? Because what you find is that at the end of the day, most of where their priorities, what do we want? We want better student outcomes, correct? So how do you measure those student outcomes, and what is it that you're paying attention to? And what you find is that all of their DEI, and by the way, I use DEI, SEL as kind of interchangeable because they kind of jump between them depending on what it is that they're doing. So everything to do with DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion was all about race. Every single question was about race, as if that's the only metric for diversity is what? And one of the questions was, how often do adults in your school talk to you about race issues in the news? That's one of the questions on the survey that measured the diversity, that gives the score, essentially, for the district as to how effective their DEI is or not is in the district. So I asked the question, I was like, so how do you improve such score if we're not talking about social studies class, for example, or something where that might be theoretically appropriate, a news story and let's talk about it within the context of the curriculum. No, we're asking about every single adult in your school, so that means your science teachers, your math teachers, your English, everybody, you as a student grade them as to whether or not they're talking about the race-based stories in the news enough. Is it always? Is it sometimes? It's et cetera. And then the next question is, to what degree does your school empower you to speak up against racism or I forget the exact wording of the thing. So essentially, it's basically like a score, essentially, as to and you say to yourself, what are they supposed to be doing here in science and math and social to improve these scores? Obviously, it's using a scoring system to really change what the focus is of what we're doing. And it's not, and by the way, it was intentional. I've heard, I didn't hear it personally directly, from teachers who heard from the previous superintendent, who's now over at Dublin. He actually flat out said, by the way, sorry for those in Dublin. Yeah, actually, I had some element to do with that because I had a conversation with him just about, once he realized, anyway, I don't want to get into that at the moment. I was like, listen, this is unacceptable. And by the way, anyway, so I don't want to lose my time. I have other things to cover that. So the issue becomes, he said, I was willing that there was a strategic decision to sacrifice proficiency test scores, in other words, academics, in favor of this SEL DEI stuff. And so I was like, okay, let's see what the results end up being. So I graphed it all and found that actually over that 5-year period of time where they're giving these things every single year, twice a year, the proficiency scores in the elementary scores are going down. And oh, by the way, they're not improving the SEL scores at all. Like, it's flat as a pancake. So they failed in both sides of the equation. And you're like, what are you doing? So now, some of the previous presenter, I know that there's short of time, there's just really too much to share on these things, said about getting rid of surveys or opting out of surveys. I have a different take on that. So let me give you a few things on what I've done working with the board members in terms of injecting policy changes. Number one, as we said, vampires get killed by sunshine. I have a number of policy, I went to the how do we create policies, et cetera. Went through the process. One of them is, hey, when we're doing these district-wide surveys, if this is part of your commitment plan, this is like the commitment plan is their internal plan of how what is it they're working on as a district over the next 5 years. They're basing it on panorama survey results. They have district-wide goals that they want for SEL. I was like, there needs to be a board policy that puts all of this on the school's website so that the parents can see what is it that you're actually doing, what is it you're actually, and they're trying, of course, to kill that in committee, and then we're getting into, because they never really had board policy. There's a lot of things we're trying to fix and all of that stuff, but Sunshine puts the thing up, because then it becomes, what's going on here? Why are you spending so much time and not being effective? I personally like surveys because once you get to that first step, which is now surveys are public and are online, the next step beyond that is, what if we start adding some of our own questions to these surveys and see what is going on here? Because, of course, they're trying to shift the conversation in one direction, which is they have, and by they, I mean there's a few people that control the situation as it relates to a leftist worldview direction to take things in. But I don't believe that's the majority at all, and particularly not the majority of teachers. Most teachers, I mean, there's a lot of liberal teachers, and that's fine. I think there's a difference between, liberal, conservative teachers. There's within the realm of normative of what in society. And then there's these left-wingers that are kind of what we've discussed. Ooh, on time. 1 minute left. That we need to basically create the data and make it public, showing that they're not doing what they're supposed to be doing, and a lot of this stuff has been very helpful. I would add, with the last minute of time, I think that SEL, rather than completely taking it as a problem that should be hit with essentially a big rock and blow it all up, I think sort of hijack it and use it for our purposes. Because I'll read you one section, and I don't dispute that there's a lot of ways that this is being used inappropriately, et cetera, but off of the Castle website specifically, and this is what the Ohio Department of Education says is the standard for research-based, okay, fine, it's a standard for research-based so-and-so. And it says, quote, families and caregivers are children's first teachers and bring deep expertise into their development, expertise, culture, and learning needs. These insights and perspectives are crucial to informing, supporting, and sustaining SEL efforts. Research suggests that evidence-based SEL programs are more effective when they extend into the home and the families and are more likely to form, that you need partnerships with schools. Families are far more likely to form partnerships with schools when their school's norms, values, and culture representations reflect their own experiences. So to the degree we can institutionalize that, in other words, what's happening here is they've taken SEL, which could be a lot of different things, and they're using it as a vehicle to transmit essentially leftist ideology. And I'm saying the moment we can say, okay, you know what, let's take SEL and actually make it the vehicle to reflect the norms of our community and measure that and see if it's actually happening, and whether or not, that's when now we're using it in our favor. And therefore, this all needs to be public, and we need to start adjusting the questions and how we're doing this to see, well, for example, one last thought. A lot of this curriculum stuff, they create committees, they make sure they put the right people on their committees, they're just enough, and then they put a few extra, people to make it look like it, and then they do whatever agenda that they want. Well, do those committees reflect the community? If they don't, they're not following this. So therefore, let's create board policies that say, you know what, this actually needs to happen. It needs to reflect the community's values, and that means that all of these committees, DEI committee, SEL committee, et cetera, all need to be reflect that, and that's something on board policy level that we can change. I'm sorry I've run out of time, but there's a lot to discuss.
Yeah. Thank you. I'm Jennifer Foyt. Thank you, Omar. And this is tough because there's just so much to share in 10 minutes, and they asked me to prepare 10 minutes of talking points, and I did, and then Jennifer covered pretty much everything that I have in here, so thank you. You did a wonderful job. So I apologize. I'm kind of going to ad-lib, and you're going to see me kind of flipping through here. I just want to make sure I really hit on some key critical issues that we're seeing in our own school district, and that's the Olintanji local school district. And the reason why I do want to mention that is Olintanji is the 4th largest district in the state of Ohio. So a lot of what we see happening in our district is going to really be reflected in probably all 88 counties in Ohio. So that is why you'll see me kind of personalize a lot of these stories, but I think they are reflective. What is my background on SEL? I'm a mother. I mean, I would add, like, I'm a Boy Scout den leader on top of that, and a Sunday school teacher. But my background is I've been in our school district for 20 years. I already graduated one daughter who graduated last year, and then I have a 12-year-old son who's in 7th grade. In terms of an education background, I'm a teacher's daughter. My mom taught in the Lakota School District. I think we had a Lakota school board member here. My mom taught in Lakota, and that's where I got my K through 12 education. I love our public schools. I ran for school board because I believed in our education system until I got a look under the hood during the COVID shutdown. That was an eye-opening moment. A friend of mine the other day said she called it her ground zero moment. And I think everyone here in this room has probably had their own ground zero moment. For me, it was kind of cumulative. My daughter had been coming home from school for several years saying, "Mom, it's just not the same." She was starting to feel the effects of a lot of this SEL that's going on, and she recognized that something wasn't right. For me, my final ground zero moment, when I finally scheduled the appointment with our superintendent and our director of curriculum, was when he was then 11, he was a 6th grader, learning simple writing structure. The example that had been given to the children had been to write about an animal, and then the article that was sent home with the children was a social justice article that was anti-law enforcement and was completely opinionated, based in false narratives, and half the reporting in it was erroneous. So I said, regardless of where you sit on this spectrum, this isn't even factual-based information. And guess what, guys? I think we missed the teaching target, because you have 11-year-olds that can't even construct their thesis, and you're just throwing so much at them. So I met with the district, and I expressed my concerns. At that meeting, I also expressed concerns that here we are in the midst of a pandemic with real learning struggles going on at home. We had at the time been paying 4 full-time equity and inclusion specialists, and my son did not have one math specialist for his building. And I said, "Houston, we have a problem." And because I voiced those opinions publicly, I was named as enemy number 1 of our equity and inclusion department. I was called a white supremacist and a racist. So I decided to run for school board, right? From that, I then ran and was defeated by the 2 candidates that were supported by our equity and inclusion department, 2 white men. I was the only minority running. I am a Hispanic woman from an immigrant family. So I thought, where is this equity? Where is this inclusion? I was looking to have that department reflect, again, what's truly in our schools. We have a very large majority of schools that are from the Asian community, and their voices are not being heard, and their cultures are not being reflected. That's a discussion for a whole nother day. So I decided to dive into all of this SEL because I quickly found out in doing my research on CRT, which my district vehemently denies has ever been taught in our schools. However, with that known, we've had parents go to our district and show them the painted ceiling tiles that said, "Know your white privilege." But CRT is not taught in Olintanji. I myself discovered when I was reviewing the Black History Month reading materials as well as video that we had 2 of our students doing their best to give the morning announcements in which they were identifying hidden heroes. They were trying to celebrate heroic people in the Black community. What a wonderful thing. The hero that they identified was a communist activist leader who had her guns used in a courthouse murder. Why is that person being celebrated when we have so many other wonderful Black leaders that we could be lifting up and educating our children about? Again, Houston, we have a problem. I kept digging. So when I started doing my digging and I started to see that SEL was definitely aligning with our district, and I started to get into the details of what is this? What is the big picture? The big picture is big government wants to own your child. And that's what this is coming down to. They want to, it kind of goes back to a very famous person who once was quoted, "He alone who owns the youth gains the future." That's Adolf Hitler. Some scary stuff. So I really started to kind of pull all the layers back, and I could see that all of this was continuing in the classroom. My son is now in 7th grade, and this year, because they are 7th graders, they have the opportunity to kind of dig a little deeper, kind of look a little closer at some bigger picture items. And when I attended curriculum night and I looked around his English classroom, they had all these books lined up on little easels. And the one book I saw was called OCD Daniel, and the other book was about depression. And then we had a few LGBTQ examples, all beautifully displayed on little easels, not one literary classic. And I'm like, oh, I'm pretty open-minded. I'm like, okay, I get it. But it was just hitting the kids over the head again and again and again. So the first writing assignment the class had was to write about their identity. And the first book club book he brought home, I flipped the book jacket over, and it said, "This book examines the deepest, darkest corners of mental illness." He's 12. Houston, we have a problem. So I continued to dig in. I continue to be concerned about the overreaching power, I guess a power grab by not only our local government, but our federal government. I fought against COVID injections that were being given in our school during school hours. Our schools have become wellness centers. You can get your COVID injection, your COVID test, you can get your annual flu vaccine, and your whole family can show up too. And all of this happens during school hours. I am not against offering a free breakfast or a free lunch, or even, I went to a flu vaccine clinic after school hours back in 2019. I'm not against that. That's community health, it's community service, that's wonderful. But our kids' scores are going down. To what Omar said, the metrics are starting to bear out, and this is destructive. And it's not only destructive to their education, it's destructive to the family as a whole, because it's getting the child to be reliant on the government instead of mom or dad. And I recognize the fact that not all children have a mom and dad, but a lot of them have great guardians. They have grandma or grandpa or an aunt or an uncle. And those are the people who should be developing the whole child, not the school. The school needs to stick to reading, writing, and arithmetic. So that brought me to what constantly is ringing in the back of my head. And a famous man once said, "The 9 most terrifying words in the English language are, 'I'm from the government and I'm here to help.'" That's Ronald Reagan, for most of you who know that. So I've been paying close attention. We've had the panorama surveys. We have a wonderful group of parents who's here today. We are starting a group called Olintanji for Educational Integrity, to be a group for us parents to go to for help, just to learn. They've done a wonderful job shining a light on the vampires. I myself was very concerned about a survey that came home last week. It was for a suicide prevention presentation that was going to be provided. I immediately was like, okay, great. Our suicide rates are up at Olintanji. I want to know all about this. I asked my counselor. Counselor did not have a copy of the presentation or of the survey. It took a week for the counselor to finally obtain the information. When I obtained the information, to Jennifer's point about the data mining that is done, it turned out that the survey was being conducted by a company called MindWise Innovations, who have subcontracted it out to a technological health company called Zillion. Zillion has collected data on over 3.7 million students in 600 plus organizations nationwide. It's a lot of data, and it's a lot of money, and it's a lot of control over our kids. So one of the things I'm going to be doing after this meeting is meeting again with our Board of Education and demanding a lot of answers to a lot of these questions. We have to take control of our own, I guess, teaching environment for our children. Our kids can't advocate for themselves. So it's up to us, and I think my time is over. So I want to just share with you a few things that you can do right now to kind of get started if you're interested in really being successful in your own school. First thing, fight with facts, not feelings. If you get a meeting, make sure you have your facts. Second thing, be prepared to offer a solution. A lot of times we go into these meetings and the administrators, their eyes gloss over because this is like the 10th meeting they've taken where someone's yelled at them. Give them a solution and move that relationship from adversarial to collaborative. You get a lot more bees with honey that way. So to your point, kind of turn that paradigm shift on how we are operating under this SEL. Do your own research and network with parents like we're doing in Olintanji. Demand your parent rights, get back in the schools. We are going to be walking the hallways, going through our libraries, stopping in for unannounced lunches when we can get in the school. Olintanji just allowed us back in the school this past week. I have not stepped foot into my son's building in 2 years. Get back inside your schools. And finally, always be curious. Just stay curious. Stay courageous. Courage is contagious. You see the one parent stand up, it's funny, there'll be 10 more behind them. So take that first step and be vigilant on behalf of your children. Thank you.
Thank you, Jennifer. Jennifer McWilliams, you're up.
So, I don't know exactly what you wanted me to cover on this part. I mean, I could just talk to what, okay. Okay, I didn't know if there was something specific. So, so I wanted to actually just, if I can, on some of these points, actually, I think I could add a little bit that might help as well. The curriculum transparency is, I mean, we need that, but just be warned that when you go to some of these schools, they will tell you that, okay, you can see the curriculum, but you can't see SEL, because social emotional learning is not a curriculum. It's a program, it's a system they implement to be integrated to the curriculum. So just be prepared for them to say that. And then that's when they will tell you, well, we can't show you the SEL program because it is third-party proprietary material. So that's when you lean on attorneys that know more than I do how to do that. But
Hey, Jennifer,
yes.
Question about that right here. On the issue of transparency and being able to look at what's being taught, here's a concern that I've heard. If I let the school know that I'm interested in taking a look at this, does that put my child on the radar? Does that put me on the radar? There's a lot of information being collected, and does that put a target on our back?
I hate answering this question. In some situations, possibly, but I'm going to be honest, right? So, but I don't think overall, I don't feel that all of the teachers are doing this, but you need to know who's working in your school, because from my experience, there are some teachers that will target kids, and so yeah, that's a concern. So when I was fired, here, I'll give you an example. When I was fired from my school, it got quite a bit of attention. I am the founder and CEO of, former CEO. I stepped down to do my own thing of Purple for Parents Indiana that he was talking about. But when I was fired, because of that organization, I got a lot of attention and it went viral. I had so many people, teachers and parents, reach out to me and say, thank you for what you're doing. I didn't know about this. I'm looking into it. Scary. I'm going to keep going. But they would do it privately. And this is really sad, but my students' parents would reach out, but they were afraid to speak up and support me in public because of what he just said. That is a major problem. That is a major problem. And so, but I don't want people to think that your child's going to go in there and everybody's just going to gang up on them, but I would be very aware of that situation. So, as far as another thing I was just going to kind of put out there was, so this is what I like to tell people: social emotional learning is, or critical race theory is the ideology, social emotional learning is a delivery system, diversity, I would call it diversity, inclusion, equity, 'cause everything is that it touches dies is the marketing system of that tool. So that is how that all works together. So that's what we would change it to die. They don't like that very much. So when you find something that they don't like, just keep pushing that buzzard. I'm just coming up with random stuff I know here, but I would also say, do not give power to labels. I don't care. People have called me everything you can possibly imagine. They have said everything about me. They have started rumors about me. I don't care, because if we don't stand up for these children, imagine what's going to happen to to the children. Okay? I'd rather take it than let these kids take it, right? So let's.
One quick point on that issue of labels. It reminds me of a story that allegedly Abraham Lincoln told, and I'll ask the question: if you call a dog's tail a leg, how many legs does the dog have? And the answer is 4, because it doesn't matter. If you call a tail a leg, it's still a tail. And to the issue of CRT, SEL, DEI, or DIE, as you would transpose and put it, it's either a tail or a leg, but it is what it is. You can label it what you want. And I saw an alarming amount last year during school board races of labeling and blaming and shaming and criticizing and canceling of families and parents who stood up and said, you know what, I'm going to try to do something different in this district. So you're absolutely right, and that obviously is designed to be a deterrent. So kudos to you for continuing to fight the battle.
Thank you. It works, right? You know, a lot of people that, right, whether it's their job, their position in the community, it works. It's effective. But the more people that stand up, right, like she said, you know, 1 stands up, 10 stands up, you know, you have to start that movement and don't give power to it. I mean, I can't even count all the things I've been called.
I have a quick question, since we have Jennifer here. Okay, so I had a quick question, because this, thanks to one of our moms from our group in Olintanji, this just came into our hands. It was a FOIA that she did, and we've been asking at Olintanji about the panorama surveys, and we've been assured everything is confidential. It's anonymous, even though your child has to use their member ID to log into the survey. It's anonymous, and it's just a survey. It helps them develop to make sure. What we just got was alarming, and my question for you, so we did find out by this FOIA that indeed the child's SEL competency score is kept in their file, and it's following them from building to building. So this particular email was from our coordinator of student well-being, and she wanted to know they were missing some files. So it was just a simple, you know, how do they find it? What exactly is an SEL score? Because I didn't even know my child had an SEL score. It doesn't show up on their report card, and it doesn't show up in Power School. What's this score they're talking about that they are keeping in their file and moving with the child from building to building?
The SEL score is based on those competencies that I talked about. So the survey will align with self-awareness, responsible decision-making, all the skills that are in the framework. And they will score the children based on their answers of the surveys in each category. And so that's what their SEL score is. Now, but you have to realize that, like I explained, they're going to say, well, the SEL score is just showing how well they're doing in making responsible decisions. But remember what I explained on what kind of responsible decisions they're making. Okay? All of this through that equity lens is the key, because I always say they destabilize language, they destabilize society. And what they're saying doesn't mean what you think it's saying, so it's always through that lens. So they're getting a score based on how well they're making decisions based on how I explained it. Or they're getting a score on how self-aware they are based on their identity on that and through the equity lens. So they're getting scored based on how equitable they are, how employable eventually they are, because they're transitioning to the employability skills. And so I will tell you, so the surveys are done with the student IDs. Their student IDs are connected directly to their social security numbers. The questions they would tell you are anonymous. That is not true. Okay, that's because they can pull it up. I am involved with one of the court cases that I'm involved with. They were able to pull that child every single question for the last 3 or 4 years, I think, surveys, questions, answers. So when they tell you it's anonymous, they're lying.
I've got the mic here, 'cause I asked if I could answer that first audience question, because I think that's a critical one. Going back to the question of, if I ask a question of my school, will I or my child be targeted? I want to provide the answer that I think is going to be universal, and that is, there's a world of difference between an individual, mother or father or guardian, asking a school district a challenging question and an organization asking that same question. So when you look at what's happening in school districts all across the state and the country, these parent advocacy groups are forming, and they have great names. Transparency seems to be a catchy one, I think because of Rocky River and their successes. Rocky River Citizens for Transparency. So look at that from the perspective of the school district. In one scenario, you get a question challenging some material that was presented to children from a parent. You might just simply ignore it. But if you have Rocky River Citizens for Transparency, and you know they represent hundreds of families throughout that community, you're much more likely to answer it, and it provides that anonymity that protects your family and your child. I think that's a key way of approaching this thing. I have another comment, but I'll wait until after questions. Yeah.
That's excellent. Thank you so much. This is a fantastic question. By the way, there are several questions here, and they're all fantastic. I'm going to try to smush some of them together. For example, there are several questions about funding, so I'll try to ask a question that hits all the points. But here's one from the audience. Has there been a policy written in any local school board addressing data collection and preventing it and preventing it now and permanently? And is there a template or an example? Omar.
Well, I want to address this data collection issue. There's already a tremendous amount of data that is collected on children, and it's sort of, okay, I'll give you a for example. If you can pause with me, because it takes just a second to kind of give the framework of this example. If a student is taking any test, a question, let's say the question is, Team A is up by 1 point, and there's 2 people on base, and the person hits a home run, which team won, A or B, right? Let's say that's the question. The answer to that question, in part, is measuring the person's proficiency at basic math. Can they add, the couple of runs, that kind of thing. It also is a measurement of their linguistic ability. In other words, they don't understand the words of the question, of how the question phrased. But it's also built into that is, when you measure these things, is how much is the kid, for example, is hungry, is coming from a home where there are 20 kids to a room, or there's, their parents got in beating up on each other, et cetera, whatever. All of those sort of problems, social problems that kind of out, or even more basic, that kid's desire to even want to answer the question, or even find that it's important. And what you find is that those social, emotional, or that soup, essentially, of everything else, it's directly tracked to economic disadvantaged students. Economic disadvantaged students, which tend to be the majority of, basically it's 100% of people in Columbus District, for example, and those are the students that are the blacks and the Hispanics, and they're consistently scoring dramatically less on proficiency scores than everybody else, and the whites and the Asians. And it's really directly correlated to language, vocabulary, and also economic disadvantage. It opens up a whole panorama of issues that come with that in terms of lack of moral models or whatever, a whole bunch of issues. And so to the degree, so there's a lot of data that's already existing. It's just sort of a matter of how you want to parse the data and what do you want to do with the data. The data that's being collected with Panorama is a bank of questions that the school districts pick from, and then they score based on how they result as to whether or not the kid has high hope or low hope. And why are they doing that? Well, basically, if you track it, kids from low socioeconomic disadvantaged communities or whatnot, and this isn't a criticism or whatnot, it's the reality, they don't necessarily have two so-called middle-class adult parents modeling those value structures of go out, work hard, make it happen, all those kinds of things that come by default. And so your kid is thinking about college. The kid from the economically disadvantaged is thinking about how to get back to their house when there's a drug dealer on the corner. And that's the kind of kids that my wife works with. She has to drive them home, all this stuff. And so you have this imagination that we really have two school districts, two different kinds of things. And those disadvantaged kids, when they come to Hilliard or they come to Dublin, they still perform really poorly. That's why there's still a massive gap in Hilliard and Dublin in the racial gap in how they score on tests. And it all goes back mostly vocabulary and also these skill sets, value structures, essentially, and then becomes a kind of thing, well, how are we going to communicate that? And that's where we already measure how well schools deal with those kind of issues. It's called value added. There's a whole bunch of data that's collected on how much do kids add value. If they have some kid coming in totally messed up, like maybe there's an immigrant from a war-torn country or a whole community of them, so whatnot. How much add value? They're starting way down here. How much do they pull them up? There's a lot of data that's collected on all of this, and it scores the schools on that stuff, and we don't want to tear all that stuff down. We just want all this to be used to advance what we want, our value structure, which is the value structure that's going to make them successful in life, and be successful, patriotic Americans. That's what we want. And if they're using the same data collecting strategies to take things in a different direction, that's what we need to turn around. And so I'm not really, I do think though that you have to be really careful about what data you're tracking against the students specifically versus averaging across the district. I would like to point out the point about if your school has a culture that they don't allow criticism, they don't allow questioning, and that's by the adults. In other words, the superintendent or Don Down says if you're a teacher and you criticize or whatever, you might get fired or whatever, and you've got this culture of fear, that's the adults modeling very bad behavior to the students. Okay? And the students, they watch, they don't care. Look, at the end of the day, you can put any books in the library. It's not about the library. It's about how adults are behaving. So how do we change what adults behaving and are modeling to the kids? We measure it. And how do you measure it? You start asking questions. You start bringing this, not as an individual, but institutionalize those questions. Is there a survey that goes out to all the teachers that says, for example, do you feel comfortable in expressing your opinion without fear of getting fired? That would be a good question. If you're going to survey, let's survey and let's start really putting a light, using the surveys to point a light on these things and then start changing the culture of these institutions, because you have to change the whole culture to make it, to do what the change that we want.
That's really powerful. Thank you for sharing that.
Sorry, I went long.
It brings to mind the idea that, and maybe this will hit home too much, but the concept of a brick. If you give a brick to a bricklayer can build something pretty special. But if you give bricks to people who are angry and storming the streets and causing chaos, they're going to do damage. And information can be the brick. And what are you going to build with it? I think that's a really important point. Scott, this question's for you. How did you get the diversity, inclusion, and equity department budget eliminated?
Evidence. We had a student that, unbeknownst to us, who had recorded the training, and not because they were against it, it's just because they were a good student and they wanted to take notes on it. So they recorded it. And that got passed on to us because they had talked to their parent, and it's like, something doesn't seem right here. And that was at the exact time that they were going to put a full-time person in our school district. So I think that point addresses a lot of the funding questions that you asked. As a taxpayer, you have a right to know where your money goes, and if you can document and show where that money went and what the result was, that is a lot more powerful than some sort of ambiguous philosophical argument about right versus wrong. Correct? Mm-hmm. Okay, a couple more. I'm going to ask one more question here. How do you respond, how do we respond is the question, to our educational experts in parentheses, superintendents, principals, who are dismissive of the state report card and say these academic measurements are totally inaccurate? Jennifer?
I'm going to pass this along. I'm just going to note quickly because Dr. Kelly Coles is in the audience with us. I don't know if you want to give a wave. And she taught me a lot about this because I was trying to fight with facts and not feelings. And you take them, the facts. You know, Olintanji, oh, we're a wonderful school district. We are. My children have had a wonderful education experience, and they've learned a lot. But what the Ohio State report cards actually spew out and what the districts put out to the parents looks really, really good. But if you go to the Ohio Department of Education website, you can Google it, you got to play around with it, but you can get in and you can actually really see the metrics. In Olintanji, for example, everything looked great on paper, not so much. There were a lot of fifth grade, they take the fifth grade reading assessment. There was a huge percentage that should not have been passed over, and they were. That is not reported back to us as parents because they are only required to really put out the scores, but you really have to dig in things in terms of scores are not as great as what your district will serve up to you because you have to remember they know that they are communicating with stakeholders and that they have to answer to the taxpayers and they want to justify that what they are doing is giving really, really good results. I wish Senator Andrew Brenner was here. He does an amazing job at really understanding the numbers, and he has shared a lot with me as well. So to answer that question, do your digging, go to the Ohio Department of Education website. You'll have to kind of get familiar with it and play around with it, but the data is there, and then reach out to your local law representative, your local representatives like a Senator Brenner who serve on these education committees, and they really can tell you a whole different story. So it's very important to understand those numbers, and it's important to see how those numbers are then really just kind of spun, or there's a whole PR system behind sharing those numbers. I come from a marketing background, and believe me, we can spin anything to make it look really, really good to the taxpayer.
I'm going to ask Jonathan to make one more comment, and then we'll wrap up, and you can stretch for a second, and then we'll call the next panel up. But Jonathan, go ahead.
Okay, yeah. So really quickly on that last point, there are, you know the expression, there's that adage, there are lies, damn lies, and then there are statistics. One of the things that we ran into in Beechwood before we left is the manipulation of data around the achievement gap. And it's common in these environments. You find people, let's face it, there's money involved. They will manipulate statistics ad nauseum in order to gain leverage and ground and grow these campaigns and programs. What we were noticing in Beechwood is near enough to Cleveland. It's a highly affluent community. There were a lot of transient families, and it was ranked at the time first, second, or third school district in the state or something. And there were a lot of minority families that were fighting to get into Beechwood, and they were taking that initial statistic of the achievement gap. But nobody ever bothered to look at the gap narrowing over time because we were getting people from low-income communities, and then the black and Hispanic kids were catching up to the white and Asian kids. Nobody will talk about that. But so to your point, being able to get in, dig in is important. But I asked for the microphone one last time. One key element, I want to be really clear about the uncomfortable elephant in the room. It started with critical race theory, and the intention of that is to divide white and black. But if we're honest, if you look around and ask people around you, it's not a white or black issue. If you go into these school board meetings, you're going to find, if you're white, you're going to find black men and women, moms and dads, who don't want this stuff, and same vice versa. One of the key ways of winning and fighting back against this is to come together. Don't buy into the narrative that divides us. I didn't want this day to go by without injecting that comment. If you're white like me, your black brothers and sisters, the families, the moms and dads out there, they care too, deeply, and they want education.
Jonathan Broadbent, Scott Douglas, Omar Terrazzi, Jennifer Foyt, I got it right, and Jennifer McWilliams. Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, please give them a round of applause.